Okay, I'm going to start today's webinar. So, hi and good morning. I'm Tracy Adams, and I've been working closely with the system selection team, helping customers to change their HR and payroll solutions or review gaps in their technology. Before I go into the introductions today, just a little housekeeping. The session today will be recorded and the slides will be available after the webinar. Please feel free to enter your questions into the question and answer part of the webinar, where we'll pick these up at the end of the session. So the title of today's webinar, as you can see, is Stick or Switch, looking at whether you should consider improving your existing technology or indeed choosing a new software. So for those that have not come across phase 3 before, we've recently celebrated our 20th anniversary in business, working across the whole of the HR and payroll marketplace, and also offering a robust and highly regarded payroll outsourcing service. So my background spans over 20 years in software, originally within the enterprise resource planning sector, across not-for-profit and also the public sector, to where I am today working with phase 3 and helping customers to implement and support their HR, payroll and finance solutions. So today I have Emma Perris joining our webinar. Hi Emma, thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule today to join us.
Hello everyone, and hello Tracy. It's great to be here today. As you know, it's a subject that's very close to my heart. My name's Emma Perris. I've got over 25 years experience implementing and refining HR solutions, as well as having helped a lot of, got my words out today, helping a wide variety of clients in their search for a new system. System selection is something I'm very passionate about, and the stick or switch conversation is one I have with a lot of customers.
So Emma's going to be presenting today and sharing her experience in implementing and refining HR and payroll systems to help you improve your system selection process, or indeed strengthen your position to select the right software, not just any software, but the right software. So Emma, before we jump into the main agenda, I'd like to ask you, when and why is a good time to carry out a system selection?
Great question. Everybody, of course, will have a different reason. If we look at the when, generally people do this because their current licensing agreement is due to end. And we both know that that isn't always the right time. The why in the main comes down to business change, either organisation or process needs. But this is also often driven by poor lack of service from the provider or a change in personnel within the HR and payroll teams.
So ideally, before you start to consider, if you haven't already, document your processes. Is that what you're saying? The best time to engage with somebody like phase 3 is really at the very start of that process?
That's right, Tracy. Absolutely, it is. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So let's jump into today's session, where we're going to cover off the following areas of interest. So documenting your internal processes, establishing the source of truth of your data, and communication. So I'm going to pass to Emma now.
Thank you very much, Tracy. It's important to note that whilst we've split these out into the 3 areas for the purpose of this webinar, it's good to understand that they are all very intertwined, and they can really help drive efficiency, reduce errors, and improve the overall functioning of any organisation. So let's start with documenting our internal processes, something everybody loves to hate or hates to love. Creating process maps or flow charts for key workflows is a great way to visualize the steps involved. It shows each step in the process and how they relate to each other, which sometimes isn't always that easy when you can't see a visual. These process documents become a valuable living document as well, not just for the project, but for the longer term. It's a good idea too to share these documents with as many people as you can. We'll come on to that later. Making them easily accessible will really help you. So think about where you're keeping these documents. Make sure it's a central repository. The maps can also be a very good training aid. So often people only see their role in a large project, and they're not always involved in all of the little elements that fit into that. So they might not understand a vital step in the process, and therefore may negate to put information in the system, for example, or they just simply don't understand and don't give it any thought. So it's a really good visual for everybody, not just the project team. There's also often a perception that all of the working during the project period is wasted in the long term, but this is far from the truth. Systems or processes should always be something that you work on, constantly improving. When you come to making future changes, these documents will help you easily see all of the steps in one place. And this avoids the need to start the whole process again. We move more than once, don't we, Tracy, in this whole process in our life cycle?
We
So
do.
having to keep going over and over this again, recreating it, is really quite labor intensive, really. I've lost count, to be fair, of the number of times that a customer has said to me, well, the project team left and we don't know why we did that, or why we made that decision, or we lost all of the training knowledge because somebody left the team. And this is where you're getting your stability. And I will mention it later on, but it's this triangle, building a good foundation. You'll hear me say that if you haven't heard me say it before, a bit later on. Process maps will also help you identify what data might be needed. So by spelling out a certain task, you can identify key bits of data that you will require at that point. If you think about your security profiles when you create a system and you make a decision not to give somebody access to a specific page, for example, when you look at your process maps, actually, it's no good me not giving that person access to that page because they actually need to complete the data. So it has a lot of positive purposes. And it will encourage ongoing collaboration too, and the input from all departments to keep that document, accurate and comprehensive. It's a fantastic thing to do. So highly recommend that you spend a considerable amount of time actually identifying and documenting these processes. This moves us on to establishing the source of truth of your data. Now, you may or may not agree with me, but reviewing your existing systems that you've now documented in your process maps, these are a pinpoint of any inconsistencies in data silos. You will see them by doing this process. And you can assess where the data came from and where it needs to go. It helps you identify any inaccuracies too. So when it comes to data, it's not uncommon to see lots of different spelling mistakes or missing information on key pages. So I go back to linking in those process maps. You're identifying who needs to fill in that data, when they need to fill in that data. And you can help to mitigate some of these problems ongoing. Train your teams on the importance of the data integrity and encourage their adherence to standardization, formats, processes. If you haven't already considered it, you could make certain fields mandatory. Now, before all the audience out there scream at me, that's not possible, it's very difficult. I'm not saying that you lock everything down, but think about the key bits of information, the key bits of data that absolutely must be right. Yeah. Think of that, old saying, rubbish in, rubbish out. By locking down or making some of these fields mandatory can really help you establish that governance. And establishing that good governance in the data practices ensures the completeness of forms, the consistency, and it will have huge benefits across the board. So it's a really positive thing to do. Yeah, get those reports accurate, understand what you need people to put in and why they need to put it in, and that will really help. The other thing that you can do is implement or consider implementing a centralized data management tool or platform to house the data. We forget how moving systems has a big impact long term. Finding information when you've moved over to different systems over the years is a real challenge sometimes, especially for those of you who may have things like pension reporting. You could go back a really, really long time in your data. And if you've gone from system to system, it's like, where do I even find this information? Is it even accurate? What do I need to, where do I need to find it? It's not unreasonable to have clients out there who have got up to potentially 25 different systems that they're trying to connect and link up with. And that's a huge task in itself, to finding out where that data is, whether it's the true source of truth. True source of the truth. Yeah, if you see what I mean. Okay. That moves us then into the communication side of things. Now, communication, Tracy, as you know, really is my thing, and it's probably the most important part of a project, any project really. Purchasing a new HR and payroll system is no different to purchasing anything in life. The reality is that it affects more than one person. If you think about when you buy a house, okay, it's you, it's your immediate family. Where do we want to go? How much money do we have? Why are we moving? Are we moving for schools? Are we moving for family? Are we moving for financial benefits or constraints? There's a lot of things that come into that mix. You then have to do that assessment of, well, what style do we want? Do we want rustic? Do we want modern? Do we want single story? Depends where we are in our age, I suppose, and our abilities. But there's lots of different things and questions that need to be asked and things to be considered in the process. Whilst the questions are slightly different to a HR and payroll system, they're not really. What is your budget? Be realistic. If you have a budget of £10,000, you're not going to be able to afford the functionality of £1 million system, and a slight exaggeration, but you know what I mean. If you have to keep things realistic, be very clear about what your budget is. Go to the right people, talk to the organization about what that budget is. Consider the drivers for moving as well. Okay, so you are looking at the current system. Is the license due to expire? When is it due to expire? What's the impact of that expiry? Would we be able to extend for another year, or would it be a few months? All of these questions need to be asked. And all due respect, Tracy, as you and I both know, that's not something that you can just necessarily answer within the HR and payroll team. There are lots of other departments that you will need to communicate with. Yeah, we do it the same internally, don't we? If we have a question or understanding, we talk to different people.
We do.
Yeah. So you need to, ensure that communication is had with everybody around the business. And you could set up project teams, You can have working groups, whatever it is that you prefer to do. But just remember, just like buying the house, it isn't about just talking to the family, just talking to the people who access the system. When you think about moving house, you might look at Ofsted reports, you might look at police reports to see what the crime rate is like, for example, because that has a financial impact. And that's no different to a HR and payroll system. You need to consider your audience. There may be people with particular needs, access, all of those things. So really talking to the wider audience across the business is so essential. It avoids the classic as well, which, I hate to hear, but nobody asked me. I don't know why it does that, why we decided to do that. Nobody asked me. And if you think about it from your own perspective, if something happens and you weren't part of that conversation, you feel that your views or your opinions, your knowledge is irrelevant and not required. And that has a negative impact when you actually come to move, which might sound a little bit strange, but you want the buy-in of the people to actually use this system, don't you? And they won't be bought in if they don't feel important and valued by you and your organization. So it's a tiny thing that can be done to have a massive impact on your project. So stick or switch, Tracy, stick or switch.
Indeed. So we've covered off some really important factors, but let's think back. Do we really need to move from our existing technology? For instance, is everything implemented that was in the original plan?
Well, that's the thing. Moving isn't always improving. You've got to ask yourselves, are you using all of the modules? Quite often clients, and we've seen it, haven't we, Tracy? Or it's this mass rush, we've got to change, we need everything. And then what happens is they get the other side of that and go, phew, thank goodness it's over. We can go back to BAU. But things don't get implemented. You may forget a module. You may not really use it to the true value. So I would really assess yourselves, the business. We made a decision to purchase a certain module. Are we actually using it? We must still be paying for it because we have access, but we didn't implementing it. If we implement it, will that actually change our world? Will it make some of the improvements that are causing this, do we stick or do we switch conversation? Rubbish in, rubbish out. If you're getting rubbish out of your system and the data isn't great, go back again to review. Have we got constraints in place that ensure the data is correct? Are we going through the processes internally to make sure people are engaging with the system and actually using it in the way they should? Because you will never change your system for the better if you cannot change the culture and the use of the system. It will remain rubbish in, rubbish out, and no amount of money. I hate to see clients waste tens of thousands of pounds on a system when it really doesn't give them any benefit. Those process maps, talk to your teams, get them to revisit them. Is this still what we do? And talk to your existing vendor. The roadmap of the product may have moved on significantly. Talk to your account manager. Do we really have the budget in this? Revisit those lessons learned that you will have done after you did that original implementation. Yeah, you can save so much time by doing things like this.
So we've decided that we're going to move. What do you need to consider as part of that process? So do you have the budget? What are the key drivers for the change? And what style of procurement suits your business?
Yeah, there's other things in there as well, isn't there, Tracy? You know, what are we going to do about BAU? Is it possible to have a new implementation at the moment? Yeah. Do we need to have an administrator of the system, or do we want to, you know, rely on a service as opposed to a product or a new system?
So
I'm
what
not sure.
does, sorry,
Sorry, go
sorry, I
on.
was about to interrupt you there, Emma. But what does changing your system look like in terms of time scale? So I appreciate that this will differ depending on the size and complexity of your business.
It does, and as the slide suggests, there are two timelines. One is finding the right system, and one is the implementation timeline. They're very different. Now, I'll revert back to my pyramid statement. You know, doing all of that work at the beginning, really understanding what you need the system to do, who needs to access it, who needs to get information from the system. Yeah, that will feed in to answering those questions.
So that answers that particular question, and I think that brings us towards the end of the presentation, or certainly towards the end. I can see that we've got a number of questions in the sideline there. But if you've got any other further questions, please pop them in and we'll try and cover off. We've got some time, so please do pop your questions across into the Q&A. So that brings us nicely onto the first question that I can see there. And I think it sort of picks up upon your earlier statement. Pyramid. I know we like to talk about the pyramid, Emma, and I know this comes up into conversation a lot during our conversations with client on the system selection. But the first question is, how can they justify the cost of a system selection when they haven't budgeted for it at that particular stage of the procurement?
So, yeah, you're absolutely right. I keep doing it, don't I? My pyramid. All of the work needs to happen at the beginning. It's the crucial foundation to a successful implementation. And you need to spend a lot of time really getting into the detail of why you're needing to move, what you need the system to achieve, digging into those process maps, and you know, the data, identifying what data we need, when we need it by spending a lot of time at this point. What you're actually doing is reducing the potential timeline for the implementation, because you've already made key decisions ahead of your implementation consultant coming in and asking you, what do you want to do? I've been on many a site where the clients decided to purchase the system, and I then asked the question, okay, where do we start? Let's look at new starters. What do we need for the new starters? And I'll be left with blank faces. We don't know. We don't know what we would need to do. We don't know what we want out of it. You know, and that's perfectly understandable. But if you really spend that time at the beginning, what you're effectively doing is going into those meetings and say, we need X, Y, and Z. And that consultant's time then is used wisely. By going in the way that I've seen in the past, what happens is that consultant is coaching you, yeah, to find out, or coaxing you to find out what you need the system to do. But that process takes longer. And before you know it, you're extending the amount of time you need to spend with those consultants. It's costing you more money. The timeline is slipping. More and more pressure builds. BAU builds up in the background. So doing that at the beginning makes a huge difference, to the point where you come to go live and you're in a much stronger position. These documents as well, that we talk about, these requirements documents that we talk about, they feed into those sessions that you do in your implementation timeline. You can go in strong with those decisions, and these can become your UAT scripts, your user acceptance scripts. Because I have to say, for anybody listening out there, and sorry for such a long answer, but there's so much to it. And it all fits into, you know what I'm like, Tracy, with these things. So very passionate about customers being, you know, having the right thing. Vendors will not write UAT scripts for you, the customer. They will do it to a degree, you know, and they'll do a great job, but they don't know the ins and outs of your environment. They can't contextualize the things that happen in your business into paper. You can. So by having all of that in, when you come to do your UAT and you find yourself with a 2-week timeline to do so, or maybe 4 if you're lucky, starting to write those scripts at that point it is a very, very difficult thing to do. The other thing, and sorry, Josie, to labour the point on this, but a lot of people say to me, well, we don't know how the system works. We can't write these UAT scripts ahead of it. You don't need to know. Not at this point. You need to know that how do you prorate a salary? Is it the same across the board? I take a figure, I divide it by 12, I divide it by working weeks in the year, whatever that is. You know the answer for that. You know what the output is. So you can do that preparation. The way you do it, I agree, until you've decided on the system that you want, it's difficult to do that, but you can help yourselves in that long-term view, in that vision of the implementation timeline. Did that answer the question, Tracy?
I think it did. I think it covered it really nicely there. So we do have an attendee question, so I'm going to read this one out. Why should I use a third party to help with system selection? Surely I could just Google some names and make the choice myself. So that's quite an interesting question.
Yeah, Google, you know, that's the way of the world these days. But what I would say is you don't know what you don't know. And yes, you could Google, yes, you could go to user groups for these vendors. You will be given reference sites, and of course these reference sites will be very positive. I'm not saying that, you know, they're not positive, but what I would say is the independence of coming to somebody like Phase 3, the knowledge of the nuances that happen in the systems, or the experience that they've had through these processes. What we can also do is help you really understand all of the steps in that process. And we found with this, Tracy, haven't we, that actually taking a customer through the journey has been really, really helpful for customers to understand what is actually going to happen. You know, by all means, I can't compete with Google personally, but, you know, the experience that we have and the knowledge about the whole process, I would say, you know, that's one of the benefits of coming to a third party like ourselves.
And I think, Emma, one of the key things that certainly I've found since working with you is that we have that engagement with quite a number of vendors across the whole market. So we're doing this on a regular basis. And I would say that most HR personnel probably change their system maybe once, twice in their whole career. We're actually working on this on a regular basis. So we're doing this day in, day out as part of our day job. So we actually have this experience, and every time we do another system selection, our experience grows further. So I suppose we're adding to that knowledge every time we do this. And I think we have that quality of assurance as well, of knowing the marketplace, knowing what our vendors are likely to do with their roadmap going forward. So I, from that point of view, we can give a lot more value than what you'd get from just Googling a vendor in the HR sector that can give you X, Y, and Z. we also encourage you to delve a little bit deeper. I think one of the key things that has come up, certainly in the conversations that I've been having, is people have underestimated the amount of time, effort, and the depth of knowledge that they need from their existing system. So I think that certainly is what I've learned, Emma, from my time with the system selection team over the last few months. So we've got an offline question that's just come in on the chat. So when will we need to engage our procurement team? So this is quite specific to part of the stage of the system selection.
As early as possible. I couldn't shout it any louder. Not doing so can seriously derail any project. Especially if you've got legal processes that you need to go through. You really need to understand, because what will happen is that will delay the project, it will add complexities, and that will ultimately add costs. Yeah.
Definitely. We've got a further question. We have a tender portal. So I'm assuming that this is coming from potentially the public sector, central government. Can you support us with that particular part of the process?
Absolutely, we can. We have lots of experience within phase 3 across the board with using different portals. So that is definitely something that we can help people with. Yeah.
And then it looks like we've got a final question. I'm just looking to see if there's anything else coming up in the Q&A. Nothing there at the moment, but we've got another one via the chat. I think you've covered this actually, Emma. Quite an important part, because this is what stresses a lot of our attendees out when they go and change a system. But can this be done alongside our day job?
Oh, it's a challenge. It's a challenge, I won't lie. You've got to add up what your priorities are. And before you make this yes or no decision, understand what you're actually changing and why you're changing. Then look at the timing, of licensing, etc. If you say we have to do this inside of 3 months, this is the priority, you are going to break your teams, and exhaustion will kick in very, very quickly. And it won't be a great experience for anybody. So what I would say is, if you can backfill to a degree, do. If you can't, be realistic about your timelines. Push them out, give people time. There are only so many hours in a day, and you're investing a lot of money. And if you rush this and don't have all of the resources there to support it, wherever possible, there's every chance that it will fail.
Yeah, and I think that's really, really key, actually. And I think that's where bringing somebody like phase 3 into the process can take or alleviate some of that pressure, because you're a sounding board. We've got a further question. Sounds like they're a little way through their process in actual fact. So I've signed with a vendor, but have been surprised how the contract is biased towards that vendor, which our legal team have not highlighted. Can phase 3 help us review contracts to expose any risks? That's quite an interesting question.
It is, and it is something that we do. So when we're doing our discovery sessions with customers before they find a vendor, we go into a lot of detail. And what we will do in that process is we will say, let's make sure that is in the contract. Let's identify this. There's a lot of ambiguity sometimes as well in the wording. And this is where phase 3 would step in and say, well, hold on a minute. We know from that assessment that you've got 150 absence schemes, and that may sound sarcastic, but it isn't. Some clients have a you know, a huge amount of absence schemes within their organization. And if in that bit of blueprint it says, you know, in the small print, we will build you 2, all due respect, you don't know how to build these at this point. How are you going to learn? You know, I am one of those that, you know, can do certain parts of, you know, of building that way. And it is taking me a long time to learn how to do that. There is no way in reality that the customers who are in this busy BAU project design, everything else, can suddenly then be asked to learn how to build parts of the system that are hugely complex. So we absolutely will be able to help with those. We will identify it throughout the process, but we can, in answer, it's a very long answer, wasn't it? We can help with those, but what helps us to help you is to understand what the need was in the first place. We
Yeah.
don't know what we don't know. And if we haven't seen what you require, so for example, we don't know that you've got 150 absence schemes, that wouldn't necessarily be picked up by us. It would be a case of repeating those questions. So going back to one of the earlier questions is why engage with people like phase 3? Well, this is exactly that. You know, that detailed scoping in the beginning, we will be flagging to you how that will impact you in the contract, how that will impact you in that journey later down the line.
I think that answers that question. I think it really firmly puts everything into perspective in terms of the more support that you've got throughout the whole process enables you to make sure that the whole project is successful. And that's where phase 3 can really lend a hand. No other questions. We've got a little bit of extra time, so if there are any, please do pop them into the question and answer now. Otherwise, I'm going to bring the webinar to a close, and I hope that you have found today's session of interest and provide you some background information. But please do reach out to myself or to Emma if you have any other questions around the process of selecting your new HR or even payroll software for that matter. Emma, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Tracy. As always, it's good to have a chat with you about this subject.
Excellent. Well, thanks again. We look forward to hearing from you and your projects over the coming week. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.